Welcome to this learning module on Asian Americans, aging, and caregiving. At the end of this module, learners will be able to describe characteristics of the aging population in the US, understand how aging services are organized, and identify different career opportunities in the field of aging. Recognize that Asian American older adults are at risk of experiencing service disparities. Specifically, we want you to understand the heterogeneity among different subgroups of Asian American older adults. Summarize cultural perspectives on aging among Asian American communities. Summarize cultural perspectives on caregiving among Asian American communities. And identify common barriers to accessing services for Asian American older adults. Let's take a closer look at aging and aging services in the United States. This slide hyperlinks to a report by the United States Census Bureau. According to this report, the US population aged 65 and over grew nearly 5 times faster than the total population over the 100-year period from 1920 to 2020. In the year 1920, about 1 in 20 people in the United States was 65 years old and over. Compare this to the year 2020, when about 1 in 6 people was 65 years old and over. The population of older adults is expected to grow even further. In 2020, those 65 years old and older comprised 16.8% of the US population, a total of 55.8 million people. By 2040, the population is expected to grow to 21.6%. Getting older in the United States can look different for different people. Let's take a closer look at older adults in the United States. In terms of gender identification, available data suggest that 56% of older adults identify as women, while 44% identify as men. In the future, we hope that more information will be available on the number of older adults who identify as non-binary. 73% of older women report living with a spouse or partner, compared with 50% of older men. 33% of older women report living alone, compared with 20% of older men. The current cohort of older adults has higher rates of being divorced, separated, or having an absent spouse, approximately 15% in 2020 compared with 5% in 1980. Most older people want to age in place. The US Centers for Disease Control and Prevention defines aging in place as the ability to live in one's own home and community safely, independently, and comfortably, regardless of age, income, or ability level. Although most older people want to age in place, the proportion of those living in institutions increases with age. 1% of those in the 65 to 74 age group live in institutions, compared with 8% for those over 85. In terms of racial ethnic diversity, in 2019, 24% of persons aged 65 and older were members of racial or ethnic minority populations. Now that we know more about older adults in the US, let's take a closer look at the network of aging services. Agencies that provide services specifically for older adults fall under 4 broad categories: governmental agencies, general aging service providers, ethnic community-based organizations, and healthcare agencies. Governmental agencies operate at the level of the federal, state, and local governments. For example, the Administration on Aging is a federal agency in the U.S. Administration for Community Living that provides leadership and expertise on programs, advocacy, and initiatives affecting older adults and their caregivers and families. Departments on aging, which operate at the state level, often work in partnership with the area agencies on aging to provide home and community-based education, support, and resources to older adults and their caregivers. Most large cities also have municipal agencies that provide programs and services to help senior citizens maintain their independence and health. General aging service providers include area agencies on aging. An area agency on aging is a public or private nonprofit agency designated by a state to address the needs and concerns of all older persons at the regional and local levels. Area agency on aging is a general term. Names of local area agencies may vary. Area agencies on aging are primarily responsible for a geographic area, also known as a planning and service area. That is either a city, a single county, or a multi-county district. Adult daycare offers mental, social, and physical stimulation and activities for adults who have lost some independence because of physical or cognitive impairments or chronic health conditions. Some faith-based organizations might also offer senior support programs. Recreation activities focusing on seniors such as yoga, water aerobics, pickleball, knitting, and book clubs might also be available through local park districts. Ethnic community-based organizations such as mutual aid associations, refugee and immigrant serving agencies, and other ethnic social service agencies might also offer programs for seniors such as case management, home health aides, cultural programs, and lunch programs, to name a few. Typically, these are community organizations that galvanize ethnic community support to provide culturally targeted services for recent immigrants and refugees. Healthcare organizations that serve the needs of seniors include hospitals and geriatric clinics, which are primary care clinics that mainly focus on care for older adults. Some large hospitals also have special memory clinics that focus on assessing and treating conditions such as Alzheimer's disease that affect the cognitive functioning of older adults. Some older adults who can no longer perform everyday activities on their own might need supervision and nursing care while living in residential facilities such as assisted living or nursing homes. Finally, hospice care centers provide specialized care and comfort for people nearing the end of life. This vast network of aging services offers many career opportunities. Some of these career opportunities include retirement planner, social worker, benefits counselor, facilities administrator, or an activities professional. Rehabilitation professions such as physical therapy, occupational therapy, and speech and language pathology also have specializations in the field of aging. Other medical professionals that work in the field of aging include geriatrician doctors and geriatric nurse practitioners. Remember that geriatrics is different from gerontology. While geriatrics deals with the care of the elderly and their needs, gerontology is the study of aging and its impacts on the population. Take a thought break. Think of career opportunities in the field of aging that seem of interest to you. Note these down on a piece of paper if you have one handy. Not only do older individuals carry with them all the factors typically associated with aging, but they also have unique experiences based on their ethnic and cultural backgrounds. Let's focus now on aging Asian Americans. People who fall under the category of Asian American trace their ancestry to many different countries of origin. Until the late 1960s, people mostly identified with their specific ethnic group. In 1968, graduate students at the University of California, Berkeley, formed the Asian American Political Alliance. The creation of this political alliance was inspired by the Black Power movement and the need to organize collectively in opposition to the Vietnam War, which was leading to large-scale suffering and death for Asians. The creation of an Asian American identity was in reaction to a long history of exclusion of Asians in the country, including the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act and a pair of Supreme Court cases in the 1920s clarifying that Asians, including South Asians, are not free white persons and therefore were excluded from becoming naturalized U.S. citizens. From here on, the umbrella term Asian American caught on and was adopted by the federal government and today is the principal identity label used by media, academics, researchers, and others to describe today's diverse Asian American population. The term was also considered a respectful alternative to less respectful terms such as Orientals. While politically useful, some people worry that the category of Asian Americans is very broad and can erase the distinct cultural realities of many different subgroups. The bottom line here is that there is a lot of heterogeneity among Asian Americans. The 2020 census included more than 40 detailed subgroups under this umbrella category. In 2021, 24 million US residents identified as Asian alone or in combination with other races. 85% of the 24 million Asian Americans identified with 6 origin groups: Chinese, Asian Indian, Filipino, Vietnamese, Korean, and Japanese. Let's take a closer look at Asian American older adults. In 2020, Asian Americans accounted for 5% of older adults in the US. The population of Asian American older adults is expected to quadruple from 2.2 million in 2017 to 7.8 million in 2060. That is, from less than 3% to 9% of the US population of older adults. Like the overall population of Asian Americans, there is a lot of diversity among Asian American older adults. The average age of some Asian American subgroups is higher than that of others. For example, Hmong, Burmese, and Nepalese Americans are relatively young, while Thai and Japanese Americans are the oldest. 27% of Asian American older adults live in multi-generational households. This is more likely for Bhutanese, Cambodians, and Laotians. English proficiency also varies widely. According to a 2013 report, 60% of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders 65 years or older had limited proficiency in English. 85% spoke a language other than English at home. 31% were believed to be linguistically isolated, which means that they live in households in which no person age 14 plus speaks English proficiently. English proficiency among Asian American older adults varies based on whether they are US or foreign-born. 57% of foreign-born Asian American older adults are English proficient, compared with 95% of those born in the US. English proficiency rates are highest among Japanese, Filipinos, and Indians, and lowest among Bhutanese and Burmese. It's time now for some self-reflection. Look at the self-reflection activity journal that accompanies this module. Take a few moments to jot down your responses to the questions asked. You may pause this video while completing this activity. Save your responses to review later. As you were completing your self-reflection journal, you might have noticed that your thoughts about aging were likely influenced by your positionality or your own social position. An individual's social position is shaped by their life experiences and factors such as their age, gender, ethnicity, and so on. These factors constitute the complex lens through which we view the world. Our perspectives on aging can thus be influenced by our own age and gender, our family context, our religious beliefs, and our cultural values. The population demographics where we live can also influence how we view aging. For example, in places where the overall population includes a large number of older adults, We are more likely to come across older people in public spaces such as grocery stores, gas stations, parks, and libraries. Having more opportunities to interact with older people and how older people are depicted in popular culture and media can also shape our views on aging. Now that you have had some time for self-reflection, let's explore cultural perspectives on aging and caregiving in Asian American communities. Becoming older entails changes in physical health and fitness. This slide summarizes common views related to physical health and fitness among Asian American older adults. Many Asian American communities have culturally embedded explanatory schema for physical ailments in old age. For example, South Asian Indians often believe in karmic causes for physical ailments. In particular, if we suffer in the current life, it is due to negative actions in the past. Likewise, if we prosper, it is due to past positive acts such as compassion. Some South Asians also believe in fatalism, that is, illness and well-being are predetermined and therefore inevitable. In the Filipino community, a significant cultural attitude is "bahala na," a linguistic expression which signifies leaving something or someone in the care of God. It can have both positive and negative connotations. "Bahala na" becomes a negative attitude if it makes one self-negating and surrenders to fate. "Bahala na" becomes a positive attitude if it raises one's courage and determination to cope with changes in one's physical health. Across Asian American subcultures, physical disability is seen as a normal part of aging. So, if you interact with Asian American older adults, you might find many of them being more accepting of feeling old and becoming less fit and being less concerned with preserving youth. When Asian American older adults take up exercise for physical health and fitness, there is a preference for forms of exercise that integrate mind-body holism, balance, and harmony, such as yoga and Tai Chi. Many Asian American older adults also seek alternative therapies to help with physical ailments. These alternative therapies include acupuncture, favored by East Asians, cupping, an ancient healing practice to relieve pain, commonly used by East Asians and Southeast Asians, homeopathy, an alternative medical practice favored by many South Asians, and Ayurveda, an alternative medical system practiced by many South Asian Indians. Please remember, these are just some examples and not an exhaustive list of alternative therapies. Perspectives on mental health among Asian American older adults are more complicated, as this generally is a taboo topic. Mental health problems are often associated with stigma or viewed as a sign of weakness. Thus, many Asian American older adults feel the need to keep mental health problems private and within the family in order to save face and to avoid shame. Available research indicates that compared with other racial ethnic groups, there is lower prevalence of diagnosed mental health conditions, such as mood disorder and anxiety disorder, among Asian American older adults. However, this could be partly explained by challenges with applying diagnoses due to unique presentation of mental health symptoms in Asian American older adults. For instance, Asian American elders with mental health concerns are more likely to present with somatic symptoms, such as unexplained body aches, more than emotional distress. When describing their problems, they also tend to avoid describing using terms such as mental illness and depression, and prefer instead to use terms such as stress and thinking too much or reminiscing about the past. It is important to note that the prevalence of mental health issues varies between different subgroups of Asian American older adults. These variations have been attributed to differences in immigrant history, exposure to war experiences, English proficiency, and socioeconomic status. However, across the board, Asian American older adults and even younger Asian Americans tend to underuse utilize mental health services. History of immigration plays a role in the mental health of Asian American older adults. Research shows that Asian American older adults with more recent immigrant history are at higher risk of generalized anxiety, depression, loneliness, and isolation. Factors that contribute to a higher prevalence of these issues include loss of pre-migration networks, difficulty establishing new connections due to limited language and cultural proficiency, limited financial resources, higher dependence on children, tenuous intergenerational dynamics, and post-migration life stresses. Far, we have talked about Asian American cultural perspectives related to aging, physical health, and mental health. We will now talk about Asian American cultural perspectives related to caregiving. At the center of this slide are cultural perspectives related to caregiving that are common across Asian American subgroups. These include collectivism, filial piety, and family hierarchy. Collectivism refers to a cultural philosophy and practice whereby decisions are typically made by the family and not on an individual basis. Filial piety refers to the cultural value that you must have respect for your parents and ancestors. This attitude is prevalent in societies influenced by religious values including Confucianism, Buddhism, Islam, Christianity, Hinduism, and Taoism. Family hierarchy refers to a practice where certain family members are in a role of authority and decision making. For example, parents possess more authority than children. Typically, family authority increases with age in Asian families. Even if a parent becomes physically frail with age, the parent-child contract remains. You might see variations of these core values in different Asian American subgroups. For example, in Chinese families, children have a strong sense of obligation and anticipation of bearing the caregiving role for their parents. In traditional South Asian families, older people expect that their oldest child, typically the eldest son and his wife, will take care of them. In Korean families, both the family and community play an important role in caregiving for older persons, and family cohesion is deemed very important in caregiving relationships. In the Vietnamese community, there is a belief that if children care for parents, both parents and children will reincarnate at a higher level in the future. In Japanese culture, caregiving is guided by the principle of reciprocity. That is, you receive care in the future due to present care for the elderly. In the Filipino community, a commonly used phrase is utang na loob, which signifies a debt of gratitude from children to parents. Again, it is important to remember that this is not an exhaustive list. These are just examples of culturally specific perspectives and expectations related to caregiving. We also need to remember that in every cultural community, there will be some people who do not subscribe to traditional beliefs and values. Therefore, it is important to not make assumptions about others, but to engage in respectful dialogue guided by a willingness to learn from others and an intention of honoring their beliefs, customs, and values. Expectations related to caregiving can be different for Asian American older adults and their caregivers. This could be due to generational differences in adhering to cultural norms. It could also be due to different levels of acculturation. Acculturation is a process of cultural and psychological change that occurs when different cultural groups come in contact. Acculturation is often seen among immigrants in the United States and may include changes in language, foods, dressing, and traditions. Asian American families are often mixed, with older members being foreign-born and younger family members being US-born. Thus, younger Asian Americans might be more acculturated than their elderly family members. Family members who are younger might also find themselves in transition between traditional Asian culture and new Western culture beliefs and values. Therefore, perceptions about caregiving become more complex and diverse as younger caregivers become more distant from the first generation immigrants. There might also be a disconnect between family member expectations of care, which is the cultural context, and what is feasible in the US context, which is the structural context. For example, older Asian Americans prefer being cared for by their family rather than being cared for by an outside caregiver. However, young caregivers might be too busy with other life demands, might live in a different city, or might not have extended support networks to care for an elderly family member on their own. Under such circumstances, the elderly family member might worry about becoming a burden or being alone if they are not able to care for themselves. On the other hand, the younger caregiver might worry about losing face or feel shame for using outside supports and services. Placement of older adults in an assisted living or long-term care facility might be considered as abandonment. Ultimately, differences in caregiving expectations can lead to caregiver strain and stress for the whole family. While utilizing formal outside services can relieve this strain, coming to a consensus about this is a delicate process of negotiation that depends on availability of resources, who has decision-making authority in the family hierarchy, and whether family members can mutually agree to translate cultural norms related to caregiving in ways that promote family cohesion. I can share an example from my own family. My father had cardiac surgery and needed post-surgical care from a nurse. My mother, sister, and I were unable to provide the care he needed. At first, my father was very uncomfortable receiving hands-on care from a stranger, but he got around it by thinking of his nurse as his third daughter. And that is exactly how he would introduce his nurse to extended family and friends, as his third daughter. Therefore, re-envisioning a formal caregiver as an adopted member of the family is how we, as a family, negotiated my father's care needs. It's time for some more self-reflection. Revisit your notes from your self-reflection journal. Have your perceptions related to aging and caregiving changed? You may pause the video for a few minutes while you think about this. So far, you have learned about the profile of Asian American older adults, their beliefs and practices related to physical and mental health, and their perspectives and expectations related to caregiving. In the final segment of this module, we turn to service barriers experienced by Asian American older adults. Let's begin by watching this video.
Everything changes now.
Lack of culturally relevant services and lack of language supports within service systems are two of the biggest barriers that Asian American older adults encounter when accessing social services. As we have already discussed, a large number of Asian American older adults are not comfortable communicating in English. As a result, they might have limited knowledge about available services and how to access them. Inadequate outreach to Asian American communities by service providers further compounds this problem. Living with younger family members who might be more acculturated and English proficient can buffer these barriers to some extent. When family members are not around to provide support, these older adults might become socially isolated. Social isolation can further hinder their ability to navigate service systems. Let's brainstorm some solutions to these service barriers. We need service providers who understand the unique needs and challenges of Asian American older adults. Trainings such as this one are critical, as some of you might be joining the cadre of aging service providers in the future. It is also important to draw more bilingual and bicultural service providers into aging service networks. We need services to be linguistically accessible and culturally relevant for Asian American older adults. We also need more accessible and meaningful community outreach. Some examples include translating brochures and handouts that describe services and eligibility criteria into multiple Asian languages. Advertising services through ethnic media, such as ethnic radio shows, newspapers published in primary languages, and commonly used social media applications such as WeChat, WhatsApp, and KakaoTalk. Another strategy might be to train community health workers to serve as cultural brokers or liaisons. That is, someone who can be in charge of bridging, linking, or mediating between Asian American older adults and aging service systems. Can you think of others? It's time to wrap up. We have a couple of questions for you to consider before you end this module. In the next 5 years, do you see yourself in the role of an aging service provider? Where in the aging services network do you see yourself? You do not have to answer these questions right now. Take your time and ponder over them and think about how the information you learn in this module can inform your future career choices. Thank you for reviewing this module. We hope you found it helpful. If you have questions, please feel free to reach out by email. The literature and resources that were used to develop the content in this video module are available in an accompanying handout.